As soon as I opened the front door and noticed the kitchen lights still on, I immediately sensed that something was wrong. Madison was always meticulous about turning off the lights. She often mentioned the electric bill, and it became a small obsession of hers. But tonight, the soft buzz of the light bulb in the otherwise empty kitchen felt intentional, as though it were a spotlight left on after the final act of a play. I called out, "Madison?" My voice bounced off the walls, too loud, almost too eager. There was no response. Upstairs, the kids were already asleep. Ethan had scattered his usual collection of dinosaur books across the bed, and Lily was snuggled up with her stuffed fox, hugging it tightly. Just half an hour ago, I had kissed them goodnight, expecting to find Madison curled up on the couch when I came downstairs. She would probably be watching one of her crime dramas, insisting that it wasn't as bad as it looked. But when I reached the living room, the couch was empty. Her phone was sitting on the kitchen counter, plugged in and charging. That was the first sign that something was off. Madison never left her phone behind. It was like an extension of her body. I picked it up, thinking that maybe she had gone for a walk and forgotten it. As I glanced at the screen, a single message caught my eye. "Can't wait to see you again. Same time tomorrow." My stomach twisted. The message was from someone named Kaylee, but Madison didn't have any friends by that name. The app was locked, but it didn't matter. The tone of the message was enough to stir something inside me. It sounded far too intimate. A feeling of doubt crept up my spine. I shook my head, trying to convince myself that I was overreacting. Madison had seemed a little distant lately, yes, but life was busy. 2 kids, demanding jobs. It wasn't unusual for a couple to drift a little. Still, the message lingered in my mind. I suddenly heard the crunch of tires on the gravel driveway. I froze, still holding her phone. A moment later, Madison walked in, clutching her jacket to shield herself from the cold. She didn't seem surprised to see me standing there, but there was something different about her expression. It was as though there was a barrier there, something hidden just beneath the surface. "You're still up?" she asked, her voice almost too casual. She tossed her keys into the bowl by the door and avoided making eye contact. "Where were you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. She paused for just a second, but I noticed it. "Out. I needed some air." "At 10 in the evening?" I asked, my voice rising slightly. "Yeah," she snapped, her tone suddenly sharp. "Is that a crime?" I held up her phone. "Kaylee texted you." Her face lost all color, the change so rapid that it was like watching a curtain fall. She reached for the phone, but I pulled it back. My chest tightened. "Who's Kaylee?" I demanded. "It's nothing," she said quickly, too quickly. "Just a friend from work." I let out a short, incredulous laugh. "A friend from work who can't wait to see you again. Same time tomorrow. Is that the kind of friendship you've got now?" Her eyes flashed with anger, but she didn't respond. Instead, she grabbed the phone out of my hand with a swift, almost jerky movement. "You're being paranoid," she spat, turning her back on me. Something inside me snapped. I wasn't the type to snoop, to interrogate, but this wasn't normal. This wasn't her, or maybe it was, and I had just been blind to it. "Paranoid?" I shot back, my voice louder now. "Then prove it. Show me the texts." "Jesus, Kyle," she hissed, spinning around to face me. Her expression was a blend of fury and something else. Fear. "Maybe? Maybe you're suffocating me. Do you have any idea how exhausting you are sometimes?" Her words struck harder than they should have. Suffocating? I was the one holding this house together, while she was off doing who knows what. But before I could respond, she stormed past me, heading upstairs. "Where are you going?" I yelled after her. "To bed," she snapped, not even looking back. "You should try it sometime." The bedroom door slammed shut behind her, and the sound echoed through the house. I stood frozen, staring at the empty staircase, my pulse pounding in my ears, my hands shaking. Anger and confusion wrestled for control of my emotions. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat at the kitchen table, her phone still in my hand. The lock screen seemed to mock me, silent and unhelpful. The house felt colder than it should have, and I knew deep down, that something had shifted between us. Something I couldn't ignore any longer. The morning after Madison had stormed upstairs, I woke up on the couch with a stiff neck and a heavier heart. I hadn't meant to fall asleep, but exhaustion had taken over around 3 in the morning. The first thing that struck me was the silence. Normally, the house was filled with the sounds of cartoons, Ethan and Lily chatting away, and the hum of the coffee machine in the background. But today it was unnervingly quiet. Madison was already gone. Her phone, which I had left on the kitchen counter in plain sight, was also gone. There was no note, no text, just an empty spot where it had been. I checked my watch. It was 9:42 in the morning. It wasn't unusual for Madison to leave early for errands on a Saturday, but something about this felt different. I filled a cup with coffee and gazed out the window, half expecting to see her car pull into the driveway. But instead, my attention was caught by the mail sticking out of the box by the curb. I grabbed the stack and absent-mindedly flipped through it as I made my way inside. Bills, junk, and then something unusual, a postcard. It wasn't addressed to either of us by name, only to our address, and the handwriting looked messy, rushed. Missed you yesterday. Thursday can't come soon enough. Bougie. I stared at the card, the words imprinted on my mind. Jake. Kaylee. The message felt connected to something, but the pieces weren't quite falling into place yet. My hands trembled as I tossed the postcard onto the table. Ethan and Lily shuffled into the kitchen, rubbing their sleepy eyes. Where's Mom? Ethan asked, his voice small and inquisitive. She had to leave early, I replied, forcing a smile. But hey, how about some pancakes? I tried to keep things light for the kids, but inside, my mind was spinning. I needed answers, and I was done waiting for Madison to provide them. By noon, I dropped the kids off at my sister's house, offering an excuse about needing to run errands. She gave me a strange look but didn't press the matter. Once back at home, I sat down at Madison's laptop. It wasn't something I ever imagined doing, but after the events of the night before, my gut told me there was something I needed to find. It took less than 5 minutes to spot her email open in a browser tab. And there, in a folder labeled Receipts, I found them. At first glance, the emails seemed unremarkable: hotel bookings, restaurant reservations, and rideshare confirmations. But the dates caught my eye. Tuesday, January 4th, hotel stay confirmed for 1 guest. Friday, February 10th, ride to Roosevelt Grill booked at 8:15 p.m. Thursday, March 2nd, hotel booking for 2 guests. A knot formed in my stomach with every new click. I opened one of the hotel confirmations and my chest tightened when I read the special instructions. Room with a view, please. Madison. These were trips she'd never mentioned. She'd never talked about booking hotels, nor had she ever mentioned the Roosevelt Grill. Definitely no mention of needing a room with a view. My fists clenched as I shut the laptop, unsure of what I was feeling: betrayal, anger, confusion. It was as if I were standing in the calm center of a storm, knowing the worst was yet to come. And then, as if on cue, the door opened. Madison walked in, a grocery bag in one hand, her phone in the other, typing away as though nothing had happened. Hey, she said casually, not bothering to look at me. I stood up slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. Where were you this morning? I asked. She froze, just for a moment, before giving me a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. What do you mean? I told you I went out for groceries. Really? I said, my voice steady but low. Because I have a postcard on the table and an inbox full of hotel receipts that say something different. Her face drained of color. For a split second, I thought she might drop the bag she was holding, but then, like flicking a switch, she let out a sharp laugh. A dismissive sound that sent chills down my spine. Oh my God, Kyle, she said, rolling her eyes. Are you seriously snooping through my emails now? That's low even for you. Don't you dare turn this around on me, I snapped. What the hell is going on, Madison? Who's Jay? And what's with all these hotels? For the first time, I saw panic flash in her eyes, but she quickly masked it, brushing past me to set the bag down on the counter. You're being ridiculous, she said, her tone suddenly cold. Jay is a colleague. The hotels were for work trips. You're blowing this way out of proportion. Work trips? I shouted, my voice trembling with frustration. Then why didn't you tell me about them? Why hide it? Because I knew you'd react like this. She shot back, her voice rising. You're so paranoid all the time, Kyle. I can't even breathe around you without being interrogated. Her words hit me like a slap. You think this is paranoia? Madison, I've been bending over backwards to keep this family together while you sneak around with whoever the hell Jay is. Her jaw tightened. For a brief moment, I thought she might finally say something real, but instead, she shook her head. I don't have to explain myself to you, she said coldly. You've clearly already made up your mind. And just like that, she walked out of the room, leaving me standing there with the truth just out of reach. Madison's retreat into the bedroom left the air thick with unspoken accusations. For a long minute I stood frozen, staring at the empty doorway as if it might offer some kind of answer. My mind raced, trying to connect the dots. But the more I thought about it, the darker the picture became. I couldn't let her get away with brushing this off again. Without thinking, I followed her, and the door to our room was slightly ajar. I walked into the room and found her sitting on the edge of the bed, her gaze fixed on the floor as if lost in thought. For a brief moment, I thought I saw a hint of guilt in her expression, but when she glanced up at me, her eyes were cold and unfeeling. "What now, Kyle?" she asked, her voice thick with exhaustion. "Haven't you said enough?" "Enough." I snapped, my frustration and anger reaching a boiling point. "You think I'm just going to ignore this?" "Madison, I found hotel receipts you never mentioned. I've got a postcard from someone who clearly misses you. And that text. Same time tomorrow? You're not even hiding it anymore." She didn't seem bothered. If anything, she looked more irritated, like I was some nuisance she couldn't shake off. "You're making something out of nothing," she said, crossing her arms defensively. "Stop lying." I shouted, my voice raw with fury. Her calm demeanor finally cracked. She shot up from the bed, her eyes burning with rage. "You want the truth, Kyle? Fine. The truth is I'm done with this. I'm tired of you hovering, tired of you playing detective, and I'm sick of this house." Her words hit me like a freight train. "Sick of the house?" I repeated, utterly stunned. "This is our home. This is our family's home. What's wrong with you?" She let out a bitter laugh, shaking her head. "You want to know what's wrong? Look in the mirror. You're so focused on being the perfect dad and husband that you don't even see how suffocating you are. Every conversation is about the kids, the bills, or what's for dinner. God forbid I want something for myself." The room seemed to spin as her words hit me. This wasn't just about postcards, hotel receipts, or texts. This was about her, and more than just being distant, she was resentful. But I wasn't about to let her deflect. "Not now. Don't you dare try to put this on me," I said, my voice low but trembling with anger. "You've been lying to me, to Ethan, and Lily for who knows how long. What's going on in those hotels, Madison? What are you hiding?" She remained silent. Her silence screamed louder than any confession could. "Who's Jay?" I pressed, stepping closer. "Is he the reason you've been sneaking around? Is he the one you've been—" "Stop it," she interrupted, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Then tell me," I demanded, my voice rising. "Tell me what's going on. Because right now, it sure looks like you're cheating on me, Madison. And if I'm wrong, you better explain why I keep finding all this stuff." Her lips quivered, but it wasn't guilt that showed, just pure anger. "You want to know who Jay is?" she spat, her words full of venom. "Fine. He's someone who doesn't treat me like a maid or a nanny. He's someone who actually listens to me. Someone who—" She stopped mid-sentence, her face flushing red, as if she realized too late that she had shared more than she intended. But the damage was already done. I felt like the world had dropped out beneath me. All those nights I stayed up late working so I could spend weekends with her and the kids, all the date nights I arranged, thinking we just needed to reconnect, it was all a lie. "What about Ethan and Lily?" I asked, my voice breaking. "Do they even cross your mind when you're with him? Have you thought about what this is going to do to them? Don't you dare bring the kids into this," she hissed. "This has nothing to do with them." "Nothing to do with them?" I snapped, incredulous. "Are you out of your mind? Everything you do affects them. They deserve better than this. They deserve better than you." Her face twisted with fury, and for a second I thought she might slap me. But instead, she grabbed her bag from the nightstand and stormed out of the room. "I'm done with this conversation," she called over her shoulder. "I need space. Don't wait up." The sound of the front door slamming reverberated throughout the house. I stood there, paralyzed, staring at the place where she had just been. My head was pounding, and my chest felt tight. But through the chaos, one thought stood clear. This wasn't just about her betrayal anymore. This was about protecting my children from the fallout of her selfishness. And for the first time, it dawned on me that I couldn't just wait for her to come back on her terms. It was time to take control. The house felt lifeless after she left, a hollow reminder of how quickly everything had unraveled. Her absence wasn't a relief, it was a painful void, a reminder of the mess my life had become. But as the minutes passed, my anger began to shift into something colder, something sharper. If she thought she could walk all over me and leave me in the dark, she was sorely mistaken. I walked downstairs, grabbed my phone, and called my sister. "Hey, Kyle," she answered, her voice calm and reassuring. "What's up? Are the kids okay?" "Yeah, they're fine. They're playing with Max," I said, cutting straight to the point. "But listen, can they stay with you overnight? I've got some things to sort out." Of course, she responded, her concern evident. Take your time. The last paragraph rephrased as per your instructions. I stood there, motionless, feeling the weight of everything crashing down on me. I needed space to think, and my sister had offered it without hesitation. It was clear now more than ever that I couldn't just sit back and wait for Madison to come back. It was time for me to regain control of my life. Once I had ensured the kids were safe, I shifted my attention to the house. This place wasn't just a home anymore, it had become my battleground. Madison had forced my hand, leaving me no choice but to take action. And I wasn't going to waste any more time feeling powerless. I started gathering the evidence, anything that could prove what I had feared. The postcard, the screenshots of the texts I had seen earlier, and copies of the hotel receipts she'd sent in an email. My hands were steady as I handled the items, but inside, my emotions were a storm. Every bit of information I uncovered only confirmed what I already knew. This wasn't just some misunderstanding, nor was it a temporary phase. She was cheating. No ambiguity, no gray area. I moved on to her bedroom. Her side of the closet was in complete disarray, half-empty hangers and clothes hastily shoved into corners. It hit me then how much of her life had already started slipping away from us. I eventually found what I was looking for inside one of her smaller bags, a notebook. Its pages were full of messy, scrawled notes reminiscent of the postcard I'd found earlier. One note stood out, meeting Jay at 7. Bring wine. Thursday, room 214, late check-in. Can't wait to see you. I felt my stomach churn, but I fought down the nausea. Flipping through the last few pages, I found something even worse, another list. Pros and cons of leaving. The pros were filled with things like freedom, no more nagging, and space to breathe. The cons? Ethan and Lily. My grip tightened around the notebook until my knuckles turned white. How could she so easily reduce our life, our family, to a list? It felt as though she was weighing a business deal, not a marriage. That was when it hit me. This wasn't a marriage anymore. It had turned into something much darker, a war. And I wasn't going to sit back and watch her destroy everything we'd built. The rest of the day was spent preparing. I packed bags for Ethan and Lily, making sure to include enough clothes, toys, and other essentials to keep them comfortable for a few days. Then I went through the house, collecting anything that was mine or belonged to the kids, things that mattered. I wasn't going to leave a single trace of us behind. By the time evening came, the house felt eerily quiet. The absence of the kids' presence felt wrong but also necessary. I wasn't running away, I was removing my children from harm's way. Madison didn't return that night, and I wasn't expecting her to. Wherever she was, whoever she was with, I knew she wouldn't have the courage to face me. The next morning, I left a note on the counter. It was short and to the point. You ignored me for an entire day. When you came back, the kids and I had disappeared. Revenge has started. It wasn't petty, it was a warning. Before I walked out the door, I did one last thing. I changed the locks. If she wanted back in, she'd have to face me first. As I shut the door behind me, I felt a shift within myself. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. But for the first time in months, I felt like I was in control. The kids were outside playing in my sister's backyard, their laughter drifting in through the open window. It was a brief moment of normalcy, a sense of peace that I desperately needed, even if my heart was still weighed down by the storm that had only just begun. Madison hadn't called, hadn't texted, at least, not yet. But I knew her well enough to know that the silence wouldn't last forever. By mid-morning, my phone buzzed. Her name appeared on the screen, and I let it ring. My grip on the coffee mug tightened. A voicemail arrived soon after, and I hesitated. I wasn't ready to hear her excuses or the lies she'd surely tell, trying to turn this around and make it my fault. But my curiosity got the best of me. After taking a deep breath, I pressed play. Kyle, her voice came through, sharp and frantic. What the hell is this? Where are you? Where are the kids? Call me back. Now. Short. Direct. Furious. I leaned back in my chair, letting her words echo in my mind. She wasn't scared, she wasn't sorry. She was furious because I had flipped the script. Good. She needed to feel that panic, that helplessness. Not long after, another call came through. And then another. By the fifth call, I finally picked up. What do you want, Madison? I said, my voice cold and steady. Where are the kids? She demanded, skipping the pleasantries. They're safe, I replied simply. That's not an answer, she snapped. You can't just take them and disappear, Kyle. This is insane. You ignored me for an entire day, I said, my voice tightening. When you came back, it was like we didn't exist to you. Did you think I would just pretend everything was fine? There was a long silence on the other end. Finally, she spoke, her tone shifting, softer now. This isn't about the kids, she said. This is about us. Whatever's going on, we need to talk about it. You can't just run away every time things get hard. I let out a bitter laugh. You think I'm the one running away? You've been lying to me. Sneaking around. Meeting, I stopped myself, my jaw tightening. You want to talk about it? Fine. Who's Jay? The pause on the other end stretched long enough that I wondered if she was about to hang up. But then she spoke again, her voice full of indignation. You've been going through my things, she said, avoiding the question. Answer me, I demanded. She sighed, a dramatic exhale, the kind that used to end arguments when we were younger. It didn't work this time. Jay is just a friend, she said carefully, her words measured. I rely on someone when everything feels overwhelming. That's it, just overwhelming. I repeated the word, and it felt like it was stuck in my throat, tasting like ashes. But what about the hotel rooms? The postcards? The texts? Were those just for talking to? Her voice turned cold, cutting through the tension. You're overreacting, Kyle. Nothing happened. I didn't cheat on you. For a moment, I almost believed her. Almost. But the cracks in her story were too wide, too deep to ignore. You're lying, I said, my voice quivering with frustration. I saw the receipts, Madison. I saw the notebook. You've been planning whatever this is for months. Don't do this, she hissed. Don't make me the villain. You did that yourself, I snapped back. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could hear her breath, the faint sound of her thinking, calculating what her next move would be. What do you want me to say? She finally asked, her voice quieter, almost defeated. The truth, I answered simply. She didn't respond. I'm filing for divorce, I said before I could stop myself. The words came out with the finality of a judge's gavel. And until everything gets figured out, the kids are staying with me. Are you serious? Her voice rose, full of shock and anger. You're going to tear this family apart because of your ridiculous insecurities? Don't you dare turn this on me, I said firmly, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. You made your choices, Madison. Now you have to live with them. I hung up before she could say anything more. The silence that followed felt deafening. But as I looked out the window and saw Ethan and Lily playing, a strange sense of clarity washed over me. This was no longer about revenge. It was about rebuilding, about protecting the things that truly mattered. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I could actually breathe. But the peace didn't last long. By the late afternoon, Madison had turned up the pressure. My phone buzzed nonstop, a constant barrage of calls and messages, some pleading, some accusing. I ignored them all, steeling myself for whatever she might throw next. But I didn't expect her to actually show up. I was in the kitchen, finishing up the dishes from lunch when I heard tires crunching on the gravel driveway. My sister's house had always been a refuge, a place of calm and normalcy. A safe haven for the kids. But seeing Madison's car pull up shattered that illusion completely. She slammed the door as she stepped out, the sound making the windows rattle. I stepped onto the porch just as she stormed toward the house, her face twisted in a storm of anger. What the hell do you think you're doing, Kyle? She barked, her voice ringing out across the yard. Keeping my kids safe, I replied, evenly blocking the doorway. Safe? She threw her hands up in exasperation. For me? Are you out of your mind? I'm their mother. And you've been lying to them, I shot back. To all of us. You don't get to play the victim now. Her jaw clenched tightly, and for a moment I thought she might shove past me. Instead, she crossed her arms, glaring at me as if she could melt steel with just a look. You're overreacting, she said, her tone controlled but simmering with rage. Whatever you think you know, you're wrong. Then prove it, I said, stepping closer. Explain the hotels, the texts, the postcards. Look me in the eye and tell me there's nothing going on. For a brief second, her eyes flickered away, just enough to reveal a tell I knew all too well. Are you seriously trying to punish me for needing space? She asked, her voice rising again. You're acting like I'm some kind of control freak. Don't, I interrupted, my voice cold. Don't try to make this about control. You've been lying to me, to our kids, for months. This isn't about space. It's about betrayal. The words hung between us, heavy and unspoken. For the first time, her anger faltered. She looked away, her posture softening, but not enough to make me think she was about to come clean. What do you want from me, Kyle? She asked quietly, almost resigned. An apology? Fine. I'm sorry. Okay. I'm sorry I didn't tell you about the hotels. I'm sorry I needed a break from all of this. She waved her hand vaguely toward the house, as if dismissing our life together as just another burden. You don't get it, do you? I said, my voice thick with disbelief. This isn't about needing a break. It's about trust. You didn't just hide things from me. You erased me from your life, Madison. And now you want to come back like nothing happened. She opened her mouth, about to speak. But before she could, I heard Ethan's voice calling from behind me. Mom! I turned to see him standing in the doorway, with Lily peeking out from behind him. Their faces were full of confusion, their eyes wide with questions they were too young to ask. Madison's expression softened instantly, her anger melting into something more calculated. Ethan, sweetheart, she said, stepping forward. I was just talking to Daddy. Everything's fine. I blocked her path, my heart pounding in my chest. You don't get to do that, I said, my voice trembling with rage. Do what? She snapped, lowering her voice just enough so the kids couldn't hear. Pretend, I said, my words shaking with anger. It's one thing to pretend everything is fine, but all the while you've been quietly tearing apart this family. Madison's eyes flashed with anger, but she didn't say anything. Instead, she knelt down to Ethan's level, forcing a smile that was anything but genuine. Why don't you and Lily head back inside? Okay? Mommy and Daddy need to talk for a bit, she said softly. Ethan hesitated, his gaze darting between us, but Lily quickly grabbed his hand, pulling him back into the house. Once they were out of earshot, Madison stood up straight, folding her arms across her chest again. This isn't over, she said in a low, menacing tone. You can't keep them from me. They're my kids too. They're staying with me, I replied firmly, meeting her glare. Until you figure out what you want and who you want, you don't get to disrupt their lives. Madison let out a bitter laugh. You think you're some kind of hero, don't you? Like you're saving them from me? God. Kyle, you're pathetic. Her words stung, but I kept my composure. Call me whatever you want, I said, stepping back toward the door. But until you start being honest, this is how it's going to be. Her angry stare followed me as I walked inside and locked the door behind me. I saw her standing there for a moment, fists clenched at her sides, her body rigid with fury. Then, she turned and marched toward her car, slamming the door shut as she left. I watched her car drive down the driveway, my hands shaking as I leaned against the wall. The fight wasn't over yet, but one thing was clear. Madison wouldn't back down easily, and neither would I. The following day, tension hung thick in the air, like an impending storm. I kept the kids occupied with games, movies, and anything else I could think of to keep their minds off the chaos building just outside. My phone had been unnervingly silent since Madison left the day before. It wasn't like her to stay quiet for so long. I knew she was planning something. By mid-afternoon, I felt my instincts kick in. A knock on the door jolted me from my thoughts. Madison didn't knock. That meant she wasn't alone. My stomach dropped as I opened the door to find her standing there, accompanied by a man in a suit. I'm here for the kids, Madison said, her voice sharp and cold. The man beside her cleared his throat and gave a tight smile. Mr. Kyle Reynolds? He asked. I'm Martin Carter, Ms. Reynolds's legal counsel. She has the right to see her children, and we'd like to resolve this matter amicably. A lawyer. She brought a lawyer to my sister's house. I felt my blood run cold but forced myself to stay calm. Amicably, I repeated, my voice tinged with disbelief. Madison, you've been lying to me for months. You think bringing a lawyer here is how we fix this? Kyle, she said, her tone dripping with condescension. This isn't about us. It's about the kids. You can't just keep them from me like this. I stepped outside and closed the door behind me, ensuring the kids wouldn't overhear. I'm not keeping them from you, I said, my voice steady. I'm protecting them from whatever mess you're bringing into their lives. The lawyer stepped forward. Mr. Reynolds, unless there's a court order saying otherwise, Ms. Reynolds is entitled to equal custody. If this goes to court, things could get complicated. Complicated? I scoffed, glaring at Madison. You want to talk about complicated? Tell him about Jay, Madison. Tell him about the hotel receipts and the postcard. Madison's face flushed, but she didn't back down. Instead, she crossed her arms and lifted her chin defiantly. We're not doing this here, she said, her voice firm. Let me see my kids, Kyle. Now. I took a step closer, my voice lowering. You don't get to walk in here with a lawyer and play the victim. If you want to see the kids, fine, but not until we figure this out in court. Her lawyer let out a sigh, clearly frustrated. Mr. Reynolds, I strongly advise you to reconsider. This kind of behavior won't look good in a custody hearing. Good, I shot back. Because I've got plenty to say in that hearing, starting with the evidence I've gathered. For the first time, Madison's composure cracked. Her jaw clenched, and she took a step forward, her voice hissing with anger. You're not taking my kids away from me, Kyle. I won't let you. I held my ground, my heart pounding in my chest. They deserve better than this. They deserve better than you sneaking around and lying to their faces. For a moment, I thought she might lash out. But instead, she turned sharply and stormed back to her car, her lawyer trailing behind her. Before getting in, she called over her shoulder, You think you've won, Kyle? This isn't over. As her car vanished down the driveway, I leaned against the doorframe, my fists clenched. She was right. It wasn't over, not by a long shot. Later that evening, there was another knock. My heart was still racing from Madison's earlier visit, and I hadn't been expecting another confrontation. But when I opened the door, it wasn't Madison or her lawyer standing there. It was Jay. He appeared younger than I had expected, possibly in his early 30s. His face was clean-shaven and his hair was slicked back neatly. His expression seemed to waver between self-assurance and discomfort. Raising his hands in a gesture of peace, he asked, Are you Kyle? His voice was steady, but I remained silent, my mind racing. What was he doing here? What was his purpose? I know you're angry, he said, stepping closer. But I thought it was time we spoke, man to man. The audacity of his words stunned me into momentary silence, but then the frustration I felt broke free. You've got some nerve showing up here, I shot back, my voice thick with anger. He didn't react to my outburst. I get it, he replied calmly. I do. But this situation, it's spiraling out of control. I couldn't hold back my laughter, a bitter sound that echoed in the quiet space. Out of control? I repeated, leaning against the doorframe. You're sleeping with my wife, and you think this is about control? He looked down, shuffling his feet slightly. I didn't come here to fight, he said. I just needed to say my piece. My piece. I spat out, my voice dripping with disdain. You've got 10 seconds before I slam this door in your face. Fine, he replied quickly, lifting his hands once more. Madison didn't tell me she was married at first. I didn't know about you or the kids. When I found out, I ended things. But she wouldn't let go. I froze. This wasn't the revelation I was expecting. You're saying she pursued you? I asked, my voice low, almost disbelieving. He nodded solemnly, his face filled with sincerity. I swear. I'm not proud of what happened. But once I knew the truth, I told her it was over. She wouldn't accept it. His words pierced through me, each one a new stab to the life I thought I had. Madison hadn't just been unfaithful. She had clung to him, refusing to let go even after everything had started to fall apart. I could barely comprehend the weight of his admission. Why are you telling me this? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper filled with tension. Because I've been where you are, he answered, his tone softening slightly. I know what it's like to be lied to and manipulated. I couldn't stand by while she dragged this out. You deserve to know the truth. His words hit me hard, like a heavy blow. For a split second, my anger shifted less at him and more at the situation, at her. What do you want from me? I asked, staring him down. Nothing, he said, shaking his head. I just wanted to come clean. You don't have to believe me. But I thought it was better that you hear it from me, rather than wonder. I stood there for a long moment, his words pressing down on me like a weight I couldn't shake off. Finally, I said, my voice hollow, Go, before I change my mind about letting you walk away. Without saying another word, he nodded and turned, heading toward his car. As he drove off, I closed the door behind me and leaned against it. My mind was reeling. The truth didn't feel like a relief. It felt like a wrecking ball, tearing apart everything I thought I knew. Madison hadn't just lied to me. She had deceived him, too, orchestrating the whole mess. For the first time, my anger wasn't solely directed at her or the situation. I felt disgusted, repulsed by everything. This was no longer just about me or the kids. It was about exposing the truth, no matter how ugly it was. And I wasn't going to let her hide behind her lies any longer. The next day, I didn't wait for Madison to make her move. I called her, my voice cold and steady as I told her we needed to meet. Meet? She asked, her voice cautious. Yes, I said firmly. Face to face. No lawyers, no distractions. Just you and me. I'm done with the games. There was a brief silence on the other end, and I could practically hear her mind racing. Finally, she responded, Fine. Where? Here, I replied. Tonight. 7 o'clock. She hesitated but eventually agreed. When she arrived, she was dressed to impress, clearly trying to project an image of control and confidence. Her face was a mix of defiance and unease, but I didn't give her a chance to settle in. "Let's get straight to it," I said as soon as she walked inside, pointing toward the kitchen table where I had laid everything out. Receipts, texts, a postcard, and the most damning of all, the notebook. Her face turned pale when she saw the evidence spread out before her. "Kyle, what is all this?" "It's the truth," I said sharply, gesturing to the pile. "No more excuses. No more lies. You're going to sit there and explain everything." She opened her mouth to protest, but I cut her off. "Don't," I said, my voice as hard as stone. "Don't insult me by pretending you don't know what this is. I talked to him, Madison. Jay came to my door and told me everything. How you lied to him, how you refused to let him go. How you clung to this. Whatever it is. Like it was some kind of escape from your own life." Her expression shifted, and for the first time, I saw real panic in her eyes. "He came to see you," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Yes," I replied, leaning forward. "And he told me everything. The truth about everything you've hidden from him. From me. How you wouldn't let go." Her shoulders slumped, and she sank into the chair at the table, staring at the pile of evidence as though it might swallow her whole. "I didn't mean for it to get this far," she whispered, barely audible. "Then why did you let it?" I snapped, my anger boiling over. "Why did you lie to me? To the kids? What was the point of all this?" I asked, watching her with a mixture of disbelief and anger. She lifted her eyes to meet mine, tears about to spill over, but I couldn't bring myself to feel sorry for her. Not anymore. "I don't know," she replied quietly, shaking her head, her voice barely above a whisper. I felt trapped, overwhelmed, as if my life was slipping from my grasp. And then she spoke about him, how he made her feel seen. "Seen," I repeated, my voice rising with frustration. "Do you hear yourself? You have 2 children who adore you, and a husband who's done everything to make you happy. And you threw it all away for a little bit of attention." She winced, her tears finally falling freely. "I was lost, Kyle," she said through her sobs. "I didn't know how to tell you. I didn't know how to stop." "Is that your excuse?" I snapped, my voice sharp. "You didn't know how to stop? You didn't think about Ethan or Lily? About what this would do to them?" Her sobs became louder, but I didn't hold back. "This isn't just about us, Madison. This is about them. They're going to grow up knowing that their mother lied, cheated, and broke apart our family. Do you even understand the gravity of what you've done?" She buried her face in her hands, muffling her cries. For a brief moment, a flicker of pity crossed my mind, but it was quickly drowned out by the harsh reality of her betrayal. When she finally looked up, her tear-streaked face was a reflection of the pain we were both feeling. "What do you want from me, Kyle?" she asked, her voice raw, desperate. "I want the truth," I replied, my voice cold but steady. "All of it. No more lies, no more distractions. Tell me everything." She took a shaky breath, and then she started. She confessed to meeting Jay through a mutual friend. She described how their innocent conversations had evolved into something deeper. She admitted to lying about work trips, using the hotels as places to meet him. And finally, with great difficulty, she acknowledged that their relationship had gone beyond just words. I stood there, listening as my heart shattered with each new revelation. The silence that followed her confession was deafening, like the weight of the world had settled into the room. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I never wanted to hurt you." I stared at her, struggling to absorb everything she had just said. Finally, I spoke, my tone firm. "It's too late for that. The damage is done. Now we have to figure out where we go from here." Her tears started again, but I couldn't stay. I turned and walked out of the room, leaving her to face the consequences of her actions. The truth had come out, but our battle was far from over. The house was eerily quiet after our confrontation. Madison stayed in the kitchen, her sobs fading into soft sniffles as I paced upstairs, my mind racing. For so long I had tried to hold onto the hope that our life could be salvaged, that there was something worth saving. But now, standing amidst the wreckage of everything she had admitted, I realized that it wasn't about saving, it was about surviving. When morning came, it was heavy with a sense of finality. I hadn't slept a wink, and Madison hadn't left either. She was still downstairs when I finally entered the kitchen. Her face was pale, her eyes swollen from crying. She looked at me, a hint of hope in her gaze, but I couldn't return it. "We need to talk about next steps," I said flatly, my voice devoid of emotion. She nodded, folding her hands on the table like a child awaiting reprimand. "The kids come first," I continued, taking a seat across from her. "No matter what happens between us, we need to keep them out of this as much as possible. They don't deserve to be dragged into our mess." "I agree," she whispered, barely audible. "I can't stay in this marriage," I said, the words cutting through the air like a blade. "Not after everything that's happened." Her breath caught, tears welling up once more, but she didn't argue. After a long silence, she spoke. "I don't want to fight. If this is what you need, I'll cooperate. I just want to be part of their lives." "You will be," I said firmly. "But not like this. Not under the same roof. We'll figure out custody, visitation, all of it. But the kids need stability, and that starts with setting clear boundaries." She nodded, her tears flowing freely again. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice cracking with regret. "I never meant to hurt you." I didn't reply. Apologies couldn't undo the damage. They couldn't erase the betrayal. By the time the kids returned from my sister's house, Madison had packed her things. She hugged Ethan and Lily tightly, her tears returning as they asked her why she was leaving. I knelt down to their level and explained in the gentlest way I could that Mommy just needed some time to herself, but that we would always be a family. The words felt empty, but they seemed to soothe them for now. As Madison walked out the door, she paused and turned to me. "Kyle," she said, her voice trembling. "I know you'll never forgive me, but I hope that someday you'll understand." I couldn't find the words to respond. The door closed behind her, and the weight of it all pressed down on me, thick and suffocating. The following weeks were a blur of paperwork, difficult conversations, and trying to build a new routine for Ethan and Lily. Madison and I had arranged a co-parenting plan, but our relationship remained strictly professional. She lived in a modest apartment on the other side of town, and the kids spent time alternating between us. There were days when the anger inside me seemed overwhelming, when I felt an urge to yell at her for all the pain she had caused. But amidst the turmoil, there were moments of clarity when I realized how much lighter I felt without her deceit hanging over me. One evening, after I had tucked the kids into bed, I took a seat with a beer in hand and thought about everything that had happened. I had lost my marriage, but I hadn't lost my sense of self. I'd been through betrayal, heartache, and frustration, yet I hadn't allowed any of it to consume me. Most importantly, I had fought hard to protect the things that mattered most to me, Ethan and Lily. If I could offer one piece of advice to anyone reading this, it would be this: trust your instincts. If something feels off, don't push it aside. Face it head-on, no matter how tough it might be. And always remember, even when everything seems shattered, there's always a way forward. For me, that path forward was about rebuilding. Not with Madison, but with the future I wanted for myself and my children. For the first time in years, I felt like I was truly heading towards something real.